Here's a question. What's Christmas without a tree? Well, for me, that would be like a cheeseburger without the cheese. So, for block number 4 of our 2022 Christmas Quilt-A-Long, we're doing a tree block. But stay tuned to the end because there is a bonus or alternative block in this video. Christmas is fast approaching, so let's get right into it. I call this the wonky method, but ironically, I really didn't make it look wonky. It is perhaps the easiest of methods, and you'll actually get 2 blocks out of this. You'll need 2 10-inch squares. One can be of a print fabric, and the other can be a solid or considered as your background. Now, it actually doesn't matter what you consider as the background because on one block, you might have the print fabric as your tree, but on that second block, the fabrics will be reversed where the background fabric becomes the tree and the print will become the background. Just make sure that there is enough contrast between the 2 fabrics. You will also need 4 2.5 by 3.5 inch strips and 2 2.5 inch squares. Now notice that the strips I'm using are actually the same blue fabric as that 10-inch square. You could use different fabrics for this if you want to, or completely do without these pieces. These pieces become the bottom of the tree. And if you decide not to do the bottom, well, the block will still look okay. I was planning on making one version without that bottom tree stump, but I later found a scrap 2.5 inch strip piece of that black and silver print fabric, so I ended up putting a bottom stump on that one as well. Let's start with the 2 10-inch squares. You'll need to make 2 diagonal cuts from the bottom corners to the top edge. The angles of these cuts is up to you. You can make them as steep or as flat as you want them to be. Again, I cut my angles pretty close to the center of the top edge, but you don't necessarily have to on your blocks. You can make them look as wonky as you want to. Once you cut your diagonal lines, swap the 2 top side pieces with the ones under them. Sew one side piece to the center triangle, then sew the other piece on the other side. You can repeat that for the other block. If you're adding the bottom tree stump, take the 2.5 by 3.5 inch rectangles and sew them to either side of the 2.5 inch square. Before you sew the top of the tree to the bottom, trim down the tree top portion to 8.5 inches wide and 6.5 inches tall. You do not necessarily have to make the top point of the tree a 1/4 inch away from the top edge. You can make it so that the point is what is called floating. This way, when you start sewing the blocks together, you don't have to worry about cutting that top point off. If you are not making the bottom tree stump, then trim the entire block to an 8.5 inch square. You may need to add an additional strip to one side depending on how deep you made your diagonal cuts. Press all of your seam allowances to one side or open whichever you desired. Now, since there are no nesting seams on this block, it really doesn't matter which way you press them. So let's take a look at the block. So here's our block, and although I called it a wonky method, it kind of doesn't look wonky because I pretty much kind of cut it pretty centered. But I would encourage all of you who are going to try this method, make some steep angled cuts and just make that tree look wonky. Now, if you do have a fabric that has a nice print and you want to feature that print, this is the method that will actually give you that. And so that's one of the things that I like about this method. If you do have a nice print fabric, this is the method that will feature that fabric really nicely. The other thing I like about this method is there's not a whole ton of measuring. I mean, in terms of getting this angle, you can go as steep or as vertical as you want to make it. I mean, I could have actually just cut the tree and go at that angle. I mean, that would have been an interesting tree. But again, not all trees look the same. So make it your own. I mean, this is one where you can have fun and experiment with the design of it. Now, what I don't like about this, you can't really get a scrappy look from it. I mean, you could probably try and do something with the background if I wanted a scrappy look, but that would actually distract from the center fabric here. So that's one thing I don't like about it. Okay. The other thing I don't like about this block, you can use a layer cake because we did start off with the 10-inch square, but if you're using something like a charm pack or some jelly roll strips, well, I guess you could do it if you, say for example, made a strip set out of the jelly roll, or you sew a couple of those charm squares together. You could use this method, but it might not be the most effective way of using fabric. So unless I was really going for a scrappy look, I probably wouldn't choose this if I'm working with something like a charm square. But what I do like about this method, very, very quick to do. I mean, you have a 10-inch square, you cut it, sew these pieces, done. Not a whole lot of intricate piecing and not a whole lot of intricate cutting of fabric too. So I kind of like that. If you are short on time, you might want to consider doing this method. I will admit that this method creates a tree that looks a bit awkward, but to keep it interesting, I'm keeping this one in. Now this method is based on flying geese units. You will need 3 flying geese units that measure 2.5 by 4.5 inches. Choose whatever method you feel comfortable in making these flying geese units. You will also need 2 2.5 by 6.5 and 2 2.5 by 3.5 background strips. And finally, you'll need 1 2.5-inch square for the tree stump. Now I found it easier to sew the flying geese units together first. Then sew the 2 side rectangles to each side. Sew the bottom pieces together, and finally sew the top and bottom halves together. So let's take a look at this block when we use a bunch of flying geese units. Now trees come in all different sizes and shapes. I mean, you don't always have that triangular tree shape. Some of them are very tall and skinny, and some of them are short and stubby. This is the tall and skinny version of a tree. Now, what I like about this method is, number one, it's very, very pre-cut friendly. I mean, you can use charm squares, you can use jelly rolls, you can use a layer cake, anything that can give you a 2.5-inch size, you can pretty much use it. What I also like about this particular method is you can scrap it up as much as you want. Now, here I kind of just did the plain same old colors, but if I were to redo this block again, what I would actually do is keep maybe this gray, triangles here, but I would make all of these things totally scrappy to see how it would look. Now, or I could go the other route where I would kind of change the colors of these, the bodies of the flying geese, and then just put like maybe a plain background and such. But again, you can just make it as scrappy as you want, or you can just do the same colors. The choice is yours. And it's easy to just flip one way or the other. What I don't like about this method, I'm not so crazy about the look, to be quite honest. I know I created this block, but yeah, it just looks a little odd. I mean, I can still see the tree shape, but I'm not going to toss it. I'm just going to use it and put it in the quilt. At least you can kind of tell it is a tree. I know it just looks a little odd, but it takes some getting used to look at. So I guess that's my major downfall with it. But give it a try. If you don't like it, you can scrap it. I mean, just try it. See how you like it. We got one more method to investigate. So let's take a look at that. The strip method uses a number of 2.5-inch strips of both print and background fabrics that are cut to various lengths. From the print fabrics, there is a 4.5, 6.5, and 8.5-inch strip length, one of each. For the background fabrics, you'll need 4 strips cut to a 3.5-inch length and 2 strips at 4.5-inch length. You will also need 1 print 2.5-inch square and 2 background 2.5-inch squares. This method uses diagonal seams, just like how you would sew 2 strips together to create your binding. Start with the 2.5 by 4.5-inch print strip. You will sew a 2.5-inch by 3.5-inch background strip on each end with a diagonal seam. Trim the corners about 1/4 inch away from the diagonal seam. Make sure you angle the seams inward toward each other. You'll end up with a unit that looks like a flying geese with really long wings. Now repeat the same steps, but this time using the 2.5-inch by 6.5-inch print strip and the 2.5 by 4.5-inch background strips. Again, make sure that the seams are angled inward towards each other. Then trim the corners about 1/4 inch away from the diagonal seam. With the 2.5-inch by 8.5-inch strip, you'll snowball each end with the 2.5-inch background square. Again, watch the angle and trim the excess about 1/4 inch away from the diagonal seam. For the stump or bottom of the block, sew the other 2.5-inch by 3.5-inch background strip to the left and right sides of the 2.5-inch print square. Then you can start sewing each of the strip units together. Press your seam allowances open or to one side, whichever you prefer. This block has no seams to nest, so it won't matter which way you press the seam allowances. So let's take a look at this block using this strip piece method. So I do like this method because of the variety that you can get. You can make it scrappy, you can make it all the same color if you wanted to. It's very pre-cut friendly. It's not that difficult to do, and you can do it fairly quickly. I guess the most difficult part about this block is if you're not used to doing that diagonal seam, it's good practice. Even if you don't get the diagonal seam perfectly correct, no big deal. It's not gonna be a total disaster. And as you guys all know, I like scrappy. You can make this as scrappy as you want. I don't think I have anything bad to say about this method, so give it a try. I mean, it's quick, it's simple, it's fairly easy, very beginner friendly, and very pre-cut friendly. A little set change here. Now, remember back in the very first video where we talk about the fabrics and, well, I think I called it the preparation video. Anyway, I made mention that this version, well, this was the sample quilt that I made in preparation for this whole series. And I mentioned that this version of the quilt was going to be gifted to a friend. And it's meant to be like a Christmas Advent calendar. Now, as part of an Advent calendar, you usually have some little trinket or some toy. It becomes part of the calendar. Well, for my version of it, I'm going to be actually doing some ornaments. If you want to join in, I'm actually going to be demonstrating how to make ornaments such as this on future YouTube lives. So stay tuned for that. And we're not just doing this ornament. There's going to be various versions of it. So in this case, I made a star. I think I have a pine cone. Am I going to do the pine cone? Well, we'll see. But there's going to be various looking ornaments. So stay tuned. I'll put some posts on the YouTube community tab where when I'm gonna go live. Yeah. Or if you missed the live, you can always catch the replay. Now, you don't have to make these ornaments. You can choose your own trinkets, but if you want to learn how to make something like this, well, join us on a YouTube live. You know, I just kind of noticed that there's a good mix of fabrics in there. It's not just cotton. No, there's some, I will admit there's some cotton poly blends. Well, I mean, don't hate me. It was cheap fabric, so I just used it. But $3.95 a yard, well, can't go wrong with that, or can't complain about that. But that kind of reminds me of a story. You know, when I first started my quilting journey back in, oh gosh, 2010? 4 spools and 80,000 stitches ago, our 4 mothers brought forth the first quilting guild. I think I might be losing it. You know, when I first started my quilting journey, I had no idea, or I had no knowledge about fabric. I thought all fabric was about the same. So I mean, if you were to tell me a quilting cotton from a polyester blend to chiffon to stretch to knits to linen, I mean, I thought fabric is fabric, so just use it. Oh boy, did I have a lot to learn. I thought that you could just use any fabric you wanted to. Nope. Well, you can technically, but there are certain characteristics about fabrics that you should know about as a quilter. About the construction, about the weave, about the bias. Yeah, those were all foreign terms to me. But slowly over the years I did learn. I learned what to look for in good quality fabric. Now that's not to say you can't use cheap or bad fabric. I mean, you use what you got, right? Over the years, I've kind of favored, or I kind of went through phases about different types of fabric or which one's my favorite. Just kind of like color too. And I had a phase where, you know, I was in love with batiks. I had a phase where I just wanted nothing but florals or big prints. I still like big prints actually. And then I had a phase where I was totally into jelly rolls and all those pre-cuts, well, jelly rolls especially. Right now, I guess the fabrics that I favor kind of depends on the project that I'm going to use it for. I love K-facet fabric for if I'm doing a collage quilt, or if I just want to quilt with nice, happy, bright cherry colors. That's my go-to. I do love Tula Pink as well. I mean, she has some, she's got some interesting prints, I will say that. The thing about Tula Pink fabric though, people go nuts trying to get their hands on it. I mean, someone once told me a story about someone paying thousands of dollars for yards of a Tula Pink fabric. Holy cow. Yeah, that person really must love their Tula Pink. Well, I shouldn't talk because I spent almost a couple $100s just on a Tula Pink fabric or quilt kit. But here's a question I'll pose to all of you. When I know some of you guys are beginning quilters out there, and some of you are experienced quilters out there. Now, for you experienced quilters, what was one thing that you had to learn or you had to get right? Or what was one misconception about quilting that you had? And over the years, you learned that it was actually not true. Put a comment down below. Let these beginning quilters learn from our mistakes. For me, again, it was all about fabric. How to tell what is, or how to tell differences in fabrics, how to tell what is a good quality fabric, and just learn about fabrics in general. Now, for you beginning quilters, here's what I will ask you guys. What's your favorite type of fabric? Do you like batiks? Do you like large prints? Do you like solids? Put a comment down below. Let everyone know what your preferences are. I do love my batiks. I do love my cafe. I do love Tula. I do love my jelly rolls still. I love a lot of things, huh? I even went through phases of different colors. Gosh, when it comes to fabric, I went through a lot of phases. Got the last block done. Let's get this one pressed and I'll show you all 10 of my blocks. Wait a minute, where did this block come from? If in case one of your blocks didn't come out right, or you just don't like the look of another block, you can substitute it for this candy block. This block is made up of one 4.5-inch center square for the middle, two 2.5-inch by 4.5-inch flying geese units, and two 2.5 by 8.5-inch background strips. First, let's talk about that 4.5-inch center square. I used 4 patch blocks because, well, I had made extra from when we did block number 1. Now you can use whatever you want so long as it measures to a 4.5-inch square. How about sewing strings or strips together? Or maybe a pinwheel block? Be creative and be unique. I took my extra 4 patch units and snowballed the corners. On one of them I used 2.5-inch squares of a background. On another, I used the cut-off background pieces. Now these are the pieces that are trimmed off from when you create, say, for example, a flying geese unit or a half-square triangle. I placed the triangle in the corner and lined it up so that the 2 triangle points are sticking out about a 1/4 inch away from the edge. Now this doesn't have to be exact. It's okay if it's a little bit off. Then I stitch 1/4 inch away from the diagonal edge of the triangle, press the triangle back, and basically snowball the corner. Now if you prefer to, you can draw a 1/4 inch line alongside the diagonal edge of the triangle, then use that line to line up the triangle in the corner. This is a great way to use those cut-off pieces. Now that we're ready to put the block together, we'll sew the flying geese units on both sides of that middle square. Make sure that the flying geese units are pointing inward. Then sew the top and bottom strips. Press your seam allowances open or to the side, whichever you prefer. So let's take a look at our optional candy block. I just think this block is so cute. Yeah, you don't often hear me say that about a quilt block, so that tells you how much I like this block. I designed this block just based on a pre-cut size of 2.5 inches. You got 2.5-inch squares or 2.5-inch strips, just cut to varying lengths. So you could do this pretty much with any size pre-cut, with a charm square, with a jelly roll, with a layer cake. I mean, it's very pre-cut friendly. What I also like about this block is it's very simple to scrap it up, or very easy to make it scrappy. As you see here, I do have 2 of the same fabrics here, but I could have swapped it up, or I could have swapped one of those out. Very simple. What I also like about this block is just the versatility of it. Because I can make any center square here, I mean, I could have put a pinwheel in there. I could have actually just sewn strips in there. Any square block that will end up being 4.5 inches unfinished, I could use that as my center. So play around with that, because the center here, that's what's going to make or break this block. Is there anything I don't like about it? It's hard to say because I really think this block is cute. So no. So if you have a block that didn't quite come out as good, but you kept it just in case, but you're not 100% sure, you might want to swap it out with one of these blocks. So play around with it. The original quilt that I had was 25 blocks. If you make 5 more of these, well, that'll be 30. That'll probably give you a good, decent sized lap quilt. So if you want to make your quilt bigger, I would consider doing this block. But again, it's your choice. It's an optional block.